This crowd rises to its feet. Vaccaro slammed it home. Garland left wing, free ball. Perfect! Garland went to the lane, lobbed to Mobley. Pow! And Allen blocked the shot at the rim. Pow! With the left hand and a foul.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs Media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. The Chase Down is presented by Fubo TV. Watch over 100 channels of live sports and TV for half the cost of cable. There's no contract, no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com. We are not continuing our team previews. You know what? I've had enough of talking about other teams. It's time for us to do some deep dive Cavs. Let's get nitty gritty. And joining me today is my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, buddy. I've also been yearning to get some takes off, to focus back on our boys after, you know, I mean, how much do our listeners want to hear about the Milwaukee Bucks, you know, in the end? They're ready. You know, it's a nice respite, but I'm ready to deep dive with a very, very esteemed and intelligent guest to tell us how stupid we are.
Yeah, we have an esteemed and intelligent guest that raised his hand when you asked who wants to talk about the Milwaukee Bucks. Welcome back to the podcast from The Athletic, Seth Partnow. Seth, how you doing, buddy? I got two questions for you. The first important one is how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. It's I feel like I'm on the back half of a podcast world tour coming off the topic we're going to talk about.
Which leads me to my second question. How dare you? just a general how dare you?
Who do you think you are and what gives you the right?
For our listeners, we should clarify. So Seth does a great job of putting together his player tiers. I actually love it as a concept. I've been ranting for years about how I hate rankings. I love player tiers, and I think your methodology is really good. When we're in this season where people are just putting out rankings for content, putting them out for engagement, we do our team previews because we don't take part in such behaviors. We try to keep it somewhat productive this time of year, but it's really that dead time and a great time to do the player tiers. So for the listeners that don't know, you obviously put out your player tiers at The Athletic, and I'm sure you just get nothing but reasonable responses when people read where their teams are at, right?
I think the real hint I've gotten about the degradation of Twitter, or X or whatever, it's Twitter. His mama called him Twitter. I'm going to call him Twitter. Is how little vitriol I've got this year compared to past years.
Seth, you should join our Discord because people are not thrilled with you.
Oh well, is it? Well, you guys run a Knicks Discord? Or Pelicans oh no, wait. It's 30 fan bases generally are displeased with me for one reason or another every time I do this.
And honestly, looking at it, I think you did a pretty fair job across the board. There's only the one kind of complaint that I had, and we'll get into that, but I wanted to have you on and kind of use this players tiers to just as an excuse, really, to have a conversation about what the players on the Cavs can do to elevate themselves in your eyes, as well as the team. Because to me, that's more interesting because, you know, ranking where guys finished in terms of overall impact for last season or how we project, it's nice to do, but we really don't know, right? Because growth isn't linear. We've seen guys just completely change their perception in one direction or the other. From year to year, and sometimes that's old players, sometimes that's young players, right? You're not always trending in the same direction. But before we get into kind of where you had the Cavs players and what they can do to elevate themselves, I want to kind of start off by assessing where exactly we finished with the playoffs last year. And obviously, the Cavs were a very good regular season team last year and came up very well short in the playoffs. And I want to get your take on when evaluating where the Cavs came up short and how they came up short. What do you feel was the largest contributing factor? Was it, the personnel around the core? Was it execution of the team itself, or something schematic that you noticed with JB Bickerstaff and the rest of the coaching staff?
Without this being a defense or an indictment of the coaching staff or anything like that, if you can't put a single cogent 5-man unit on the floor in the playoffs, unless you have, a top 3, 5, 7 guy who can paper over some of those cracks, you're kind of done. Mm-hmm. And this was this was a concern for the Cavs the entirety of last year. The small forward position, the fact that you have to play, if you're going to have your best players on the floor, you got to play 2 small guards and 2 bigs. And with really almost a blank spot in between them, everything else kind of doesn't matter once you come up against competent playoff level opposition. I think that's how it played out. Okay, you're not happy with how the series went for Jared Allen or for Darius Garland or what have you. But really,
everyone is the correct answer there.
Yeah. But those are, I mean, those are kind of small dial things. The big dial things is it's the expression that football coach, it's not X's and O's, it's Jimmy's and Joe's. And the playoffs are very much a weak link game. Teams are so focused on, that's the weakness, we're going there every time. And I don't know, okay, you might or might not have liked the moves the coaching staff made. What were the better ones? You're sort of they were in this weird sort of catch-22 in whatever button Bickerstaff was going to press was going to be wrong. And so the kind of the road not traveled always looks better, even though that road is pretty, musty too, just because of the options they had or didn't have on the roster.
I mean, the reality is they did push most of the buttons by the end. The buttons just didn't really bear fruit, I mean, there were certainly, I think there were some schematic things, some rotation things that you could quibble with, keeping Ricky Rubio in the rotation when it was clear it was just he wasn't going to be there. I get it. There's things to pick at and gripe at, but we kind of thought the Danny Green thing was going to be a breaking glass in case of emergency, and they had to break that glass pretty quick, and it just didn't bear fruit. So something that I'm interested in your perspective as someone who has worked in the league and covers the wider league. I feel like in the past it used to be just get top end talent and everything will figure itself out. And from my perspective, it kind of seems like not having non-NBA players kind of is the more important thing right now in terms of making sure you're not playing anyone who can't hang on the floor. Do you think that is why do you think that is? That you look at the Lakers, they went from playing a lot of guys who were barely NBA players anymore, just add helpful bodies, and then all of a sudden they take off. How much do you think that factors into team building these days?
I think it's extremely important, especially looking towards the postseason. There are teams that have gotten to a certain point just by having no bad players, but you still need the top end talent. But you need both. You need to be able to, as you say, not have sub rotation players on the floor as much as possible, because again, in the playoffs, this is the 82-16 thing gets played out a little bit, but only a little bit, because teams have time to prepare and they can watch tape and they know, okay, well, this player is vulnerable to this thing, so anytime they deploy him, we're just doing that, and we're going to do it again. And then if they double team, we're countering. And then and so you're just always at a disadvantage if you sort of have this bright sign saying attack here. And whether that's a guy you don't have to guard on offense when you're on offense, or an obvious weak point defensively, teams just are ruthless in a way that they aren't necessarily in the playoffs. Certainly game to game, you might find something and keep going at it. But you don't have the prep time to sort of cycle through. Okay, these are the 10 things we're going to try to get at. We're going to see which one we like the look of as we're going after it, and then we're going to do that until they just change something or stop it.
Yeah,
and you have, again, there's talked about it up front. There's sort of 3 obvious weaknesses of this Cavs roster, and that's the 2 small guards, the 2 bigs, and no small forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we are not the Blame the Coach podcast. I find it so much more interesting to talk about individual player performance and not acting like every single player on the team, even though we're big fans of them, that they can do no wrong, right? I think it's so much more interesting to highlight areas where they can improve and areas where they've come up short, because if they close that gap and they improve, that's something that should be celebrated. And if you're just acting like they were already doing everything right, you're not going to get to the truth. And I feel like looking at it with the Cavs, it's funny because they had a decent amount, considering the personnel they had a decent amount of ball movement within their offense. You look for the regular season, they were number 2 in the league in terms of frequency of points off of cuts. That continued in the playoffs. It stayed. They were number 1 in points per possession off of cuts. Their points per possession in the playoffs was still top 5 in efficiency. Their isolation, looking back at it, and I put myself through rewatching this series. Carter, I said I was going to do it. I have done it. Thinking
Stronger man than
I know. I'm very aware of this. But thinking back, I was like, you know what? It's so often kind of broke down into isolation and whatnot. And Donovan Mitchell, not making those ISO shots. And yeah, the efficiency of both he and Garland went down in those scenarios. But they're not a high ISO team. In the regular season, it was only 6.5%. And in the playoffs, it was 5.7%. But what really happened was their efficiency, both for pick and roll ball handlers and pick and roll roll men, went down the tubes because they've been generating movement usually with 4 of the 5 guys out there, right? Like they're running horns with the 2 guards and one of the bigs. They're trying to generate movement there. And when you get to the playoffs where the other team is just focused on taking away that action, taking away all your effectiveness in the pick and roll, your bread and butter is now gone. Do you think the changes that the Cavs made in terms of personnel, adding Max Strus, adding George Niang, a larger guard in Ty Jerome, do you think those type of moves can make a difference and make it harder for the core, for teams to take away what the core does best? Or do you feel like it's a half measure that it's still kind of to be seen whether or not it can all kind of click together as a 5-man unit?
So I think those are especially Niang and Strus. It's very sensible moves. Those are players who can at least survive defensively and have to be guarded on the perimeter. I think that Niang is probably a better shooter. Strus probably has a little more movement off the dribble and is a better defender. So in terms of just having kind of a playable guy there, and I've Isaac Okoro is someone who I've kind of think has potential at times. I don't know if it's on a team where he has to play the 3 alongside 2 non-shooting bigs. Yeah. But I do think that is an improvement there. I don't know if it does enough to sort of countermand some of the other issues, but I think that is definitely a step change improvement. I think that do they win the series against the Knicks if their starting 3 is Max Strus? I'm not going to go so far and say yes, but I think it's a. I will.
I saw what Max Strus did against the Knicks, and I'm going to just ignore Jimmy Butler and Bam in that equation. It was all Max Strus.
Well, but I mean, is Max Strus going to keep the Knicks from getting every offensive rebound?
Best defense in the postseason, even with it, Seth.
I think the Cavs offense was so abysmal in that series that, giving the Knicks second chance opportunities, like that really came through. And one of the smartest observations that Carter made, and I hate to admit it, but one of the things he said after that series was, I feel like Jalen Brunson is going to have a better series next round against Miami, and it's not going to be talked about the same way, because you look what he did against the Cavs, 24 points, 5 assists on a 53 true shooting percentage. Basically kind of the same production that we got out of Garland, even though Garland was more efficient in that series. But because he kind of hit those big shots and the Cavs were so kind of anemic on the offensive end, every one of those second chance opportunities and buckets felt so big. It felt significant versus against Miami. He's scoring 32 points per game on high efficiency, but it just kind of feels like a drop in the bucket. I don't know. I think the rebounding is a concern. I think the options at the power forward behind Evan Mobley are probably one of my biggest concerns with the roster. But I think it was much, much more about the offense than the second chance opportunities.
Yeah.
Well, it is a problem insofar as that's something that is, if you are playing 2 bigs, that's something that is supposed to be a strength.
Agreed.
And that turning into a almost is it going too far to say a series losing weakness?
I would say it's going too far because their defensive numbers were still so good, but it was embarrassing. I think we can all agree that it didn't feel good.
I mean, yeah, okay, maybe that even if series loses, but it was a highly detrimental to their chances in that series. And if you're playing two bigs, that's not supposed to happen.
Yeah, it's just something that they got to get better at, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the main thing. And some of the reporting around the team too, you hear mention of putting Jared Allen in such a disadvantageous position by having him come so far beyond the 3-point line to blitz Jalen Brunson. He's not in rebounding position, tiring him out. Kind of getting away from core defensive principles gets mentioned. But at the end of the day, those guys need to get stronger and they need to get better at it. And everyone else around needs to do better, right? Like, because Josh Hart playing shooting guard was getting a lot of kind of those back-breaking offensive rebounds, and that's a situation where Donovan Mitchell needs to be better in those spots as well.
So here's and I know we're going to start to hit on some players, and this is maybe a good segue into Jared Allen. Another thing that I think has become increasingly clear to me over the years. The recent seasons is that body strength. It's not the NBA has moved away from being just big burly guys whacking into each other like it was in sort of the early aughts. But in the playoffs, physical, just body strength has become such an important thing. And a lot of the teams that do well playing small ball, it's because they've got tough, strong, grimy, athletic guards who are able to go in there and get under big men and push them around and stuff like that. And I say all that by way of saying, okay, Evan Mobley's young. He's in his second year. He can still fill out and get stronger. Jared Allen is probably someone who, if he was going to get, bigger and stronger, we'd probably have seen more of it by now. And I just worry that for a player I think his skill level is higher than he's given credit for, but I think his skill limitations in terms of as a jump shooter and ball handler combined with that sort of lack of physical robustness is a tough combo for kind of a playoff starting five.
Yeah, I mean,
so that's why even though I think he is regular season a better player than some of the players that I have him behind, from in a playoff setting, at just he got. I mean, you talked about out of position, whatever. I just remember Mitchell Robinson and Julius Randle ragdolling him.
Yeah, there was certainly some possessions where that happened. There's just no way around it. Something I want to ask you about, though, kind of with regard to these moves, is you've worked in a front office, and from folks who really know analytics like you do, like a lot of times what we hear is that a lot of these analytic metrics and the ways we can kind of judge how a team does, it's kind of a byproduct, at least for individual players, of their circumstance. And like something that I really one of the reasons I advocated so strongly for the kind of moves the Cavs made this offseason, like Strus was my number one target and Niang was my backup, and they got both. And the real reason I wanted to do that is like I just want the core players of this team, the guys like Jared Allen, to be put in a spot where the rest of the roster makes enough sense for us to actually evaluate them. Like, how much do you think the Cavs helped themselves out on that front just by making those moves, in terms of like, hey, we're at least going to have 7-8 guys that we know can play. We've got more than 2 shooters that can, on the floor at any given time now. Like, how much do you think that impacts their ability to actually not only evaluate, their whole team, but like what they need to do to help their core succeed and, figure out who really is part of that core?
I think that's a tremendous point. This is a problem that I've had with other teams. The way the Pistons have built, for example. Now, some of it, like Cade Cunningham was hurt most of last year anyway. But even in prospect, they didn't have a roster that would allow for a clean evaluation of him. And I think that is a problem that a lot of teams make, because finding out a guy can't play isn't the worst thing that can happen. The worst thing can happen is a guy's going into like a contract year or an extension window and you don't know. That's like, a guy not being good enough, that's not great, but at least you can make a decision. You move on. You make other plans. Not knowing is where you make the big mistakes. It's where you give a guy, well, sure, it'll work out. You give him, a 4-year contract for high 20s or something like that, and it turns out he is a playoff 8th man or something like that. It's like, well, that didn't work out, and we're stuck with that for 4 more seasons, and then you're kind of done, unless you're in one of the franchises, and there's not that many of them anymore that can sort of buy their way out of that level of mistake. So all of which is to say, I think that's a tremendous point in terms of, put them with a guy who is a legitimate like floor spacing 3, and see how the offense looks from a spacing standpoint. If you can figure out where to put, Mobley and Allen so that you can operate around them. Also, frankly, you evaluate the coaching staff as well.
Yeah.
Again, okay, they didn't make the right moves. There weren't right moves to make. So
there's levers to pull right now, right?
Exactly.
Like that was one of the points we've been making is, I finally feel confident enough in a rotation that every player kind of has a defined role, right? Like George Niang's probably going to play more stretch 4 than actually on the wing with this team. And Isaac Okoro, we share your kind of, I wouldn't even say enthusiasm, but still belief that there's something there. I think him coming in off the bench when there's only one big on the floor and he can kind of, play as that cutter and showcase some of the other aspects of his game, I think it's a better situation for them to be able to evaluate them. So I feel better about the ability to analyze the core. I feel better about the ability to analyze the coaching staff. Do you think they've done enough, though, in terms of, okay, this is enough support for us to really get a good read of the core?
Enough relative to being a title team, or enough relative to the sort of the levers and mechanisms they had this offseason?
To assess whether or not they're on the right path to eventually win a title. Like, I don't think Carter and I expect them to go out there and win this year. Last year we were saying, you know what, ignore the regular season metrics. Experience really, really matters. This team's way too young. They're going to have a bad series. We thought it was going to happen in the second round.
Yeah.
But we kind of knew this was going to happen. This is a process. This takes time. Do you feel like it's enough to assess whether or not this core is on the right path, that they can contend for a title one day, and potentially, if they stay together, have a decent runway here?
I think if they go into the playoffs relatively healthy with starting Garland, Mitchell, Strus, and the 2 bigs, I think that I have questions about whether that will actually work, but those questions are going to get answered in the sort of way, as opposed to, well, you're playing 4-on-5. So how do we know? So yes, to that extent, I do. I mean, I think that, and I think relative to the levers, mechanisms, sort of the exceptions that they had this summer, I think they did very well. In terms of it's just
they didn't have a lot of bullets in the chamber.
Yeah, and you get back to maybe you have enough talent, period, but is it the right sort of mix of talent? And that gets into some other questions, and there's rumblings in league circles about one of the backcourt players on the Cavs. I don't know how much you guys want to actually get into that, but
no, we've talked about it plenty, right? Like, it's if Donovan Mitchell's, the thing we've said over and over again is, if Donovan Mitchell's main focus is winning, then you got to go out there and prove we can provide the best situation for you to contend, right? For you to win, because he's not a good enough playmaker to play as a lead guard, so he's going to have to play next to a point guard, and with very few exceptions, that means it's going to be a small backcourt. So in theory, if you're going to have a small backcourt, you're going to want to have that backline support. So in theory, Cleveland should work, right? So you're going to have to try to win him over just like any other player. And we'll see if the talent and support is enough to translate to playoff success. But we don't have to question whether or not the support we get from Zoom translates to success. Support for this podcast and the following message comes from Zoom. 500,000 businesses connect using Zoom, a single platform for phone, chat, workspaces, events, apps, and video. Zoom enables real-time collaboration for teams around the globe. Zoom, how the world connects. Carter, I saw you raise your hand. What were you want to say there?
Something I was going to say, to that point about, because there is going to be consternation about the Jared Allen, Evan Mobley pairing until Evan proves that he can be a jump shooter, which, the early returns are not good on that happening at this point. However, one thing I'll say is I do want to push back a little gently on this, Seth, in the sense that, like, with the way salaries are rising, I think just because Jared is young-ish and kind of on the same timeline as these guys, people are viewing him as like, a guaranteed has to play 30 minutes a game guy. Like, do you feel like just part of what they needed to do is just be able to not have to play him? Because there's a lot of really great rotation players on a lot of really good fourth best players on teams have series that aren't right for them. Or that maybe they only play in some lineups in those series. Like, how much does a guy like Georges Niang just being there to be able to be like, hey, our spacing kind of sucks right now. Jarrett, we're just going to stagger you with Evan and we're going to play, you might go down to 20 minutes a game. How much do you think that helps?
I mean, I think that's definitely got to be the right matchup because are you able to guard anybody?
And that's honestly is that's kind of my next question, which is they added two dudes who are not great defenders. Struce competes.
I want to push back on that a little bit.
Okay.
I think Niang is a guy who, if he's not, guarding primary guys, is going to be in the right spots. He's going to stay in scheme, going to be competent. I think Struce has a little bit. He's not going to stay in front of like the jet point guards, but I think he is a good enough mover and has enough size to credibly guard, not lock down, but credibly guard a decent range of players. He's a substantially better defender than Karis LeVert, for example.
I think I would disagree with that at the point of attack, but as a help defender, I would certainly agree with that.
I think he's more athletic, quicker, and also he uses he's a big dude. He uses his body very well to get in front of people. So I think he is a solid plus defender.
You just reminded me when we were watching the playoffs, I messaged Carter saying, I don't know why, but Struce just reminds me of a water polo player. I can't even explain it, but he just has that
frame, baby.
Yeah,
it's an odd frame. It must be said. I do think it's an interesting kind of conundrum on the defensive end, Seth, because even though Struce is obviously going to juice the offense and everything's going to make a lot more sense on that end. What do you think about kind of the test they're putting on those two bigs? Because it kind of feels like they're taking it to its logical conclusion of like, what's the furthest amount of offensive personnel we can put on the floor and still expect, Mobley and Allen to mop that up. And I've said this before, I do think there's some interesting parallels with what the Jazz did with Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, where they just kind of slowly eschewed every possible defender to just say, Rudy will take care of it. Like, do you think the Cavs are better equipped to kind of make that play knowing that they at least have two dudes there? So, they can have Evan go switch out on some perimeter players and have Jarrett still at the rim.
Whatever you want to say about Max Strus, he's a better defender than kind of mid to late 30s Bojan Bogdanovic and any age Jordan Clarkson.
Yeah.
So, I think that the analogy breaks down there a little bit, and also and this is maybe more nitty gritty. Just Mobley and Allen have a little bit more scheme versatility than Gobert did. Now, some of that is the fact that Gobert's so good as a rim protector. It's like, okay, even if he did have some little bit of switchability, why?
Yeah, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face if you've got him hanging on the perimeter, where the Cavs are a little different.
It'd be like Clay trying to learn how to dribble like Kyrie, right? Like, it's just, well, you're wasting energy. You just move around and you hit everything. Like, that's what you do.
It's the Erling Haaland of the NBA. Just no dribbles, but just buckets. You didn't see that one coming, did you?
No,
I didn't
see that reference dropping on this pod.
I absolutely did not. But let's get into your tiers, because I do think where you had a lot of these guys was fair. Karis LeVert was in the 5th tier. We'll give a little shout out to him. Jared Allen was in tier 4B, kind of labeled in that B plus big sections, along with Brooke Lopez, Miles Turner, Karl Anthony Towns. I thought that was completely fair. Evan Mobley, tier 4. You kind of had him in that high hopes. I thought you did a nice kind of detailed breakdown there. Similar players in that tier: Kristaps Porzingis, Robert Williams, Aaron Gordon, and Domantas Sabonis. Once again, I think completely fair. I have no gripes and grievances there. Darius Garland, tier 4A, small guards portion of the sub tier, along with Chris Paul, CJ McCollum, Derek White. As you can probably guess, this is where I just thought what led to the debate and argument in our Discord was basically what differentiates Darius Garland being in this tier rather than the tier above him. Because you look at kind of that 3rd tier of 3C guards: LaMelo, Halliburton, Beal; 3B, Brunson, Holiday, Kyrie, Trey. And we were having a discussion of basically, if this were rankings, could understand Garland being put behind some of those guys, especially guys that have had further playoff runs, more playoff success. I couldn't really understand him kind of being a tier removed, though. That's kind of where I pushed back a little bit, and I wanted to get kind of a detailed explanation in your eyes of what separates him from those guys, because you know, this has now been 2 years of Garland having a decent amount of team success as well.
Yeah, he's small and slight.
That's fair.
So, Chris Paul is down there because he's kind of aged to being down there. He was among like the smaller guys. He was much higher because he was, I mean, he still is like very tough, very strong. Garland is slight. He does not navigate screens very well. He's going to be a target for our ball and off ball screens in the playoff series you play. And is he good enough offensively to balance that out? Maybe some, but you look at the guys who are above there. I think that LaMelo and Halliburton, that's more just pure size. Yeah. But is Bradley Beal even probably similar offensive skill set, but just bigger also. And is he Trae Young level as an offensive player?
I wouldn't necessarily like. What I like about Garland's offensive game is that I think his game is more malleable than Trae's. Like when you talk about adding talent around, like he's got a better ability to play off ball. I think the fact that you were able to integrate Donovan Mitchell and Garland's stats didn't drop off at all. And Mitchell, as a result, had a career year. I think that's something that's a feather in his cap. And while he is slight, and that's something that even like you see off-season interviews, Garland's talked about, I was just like, first month or two, I was in the gym. Like I needed to add more kind of size. I need to add more strength. The beating of the playoffs, which is, a common thing you hear from players after their first taste of playoff basketball. But I've always felt like he does, for his size and for his frame, I feel like he does a good job defensively.
I don't care about for his size though.
No, but we're not even saying like, yeah. There is no good defensive metric. I understand that there is none. They're all black box stats. But even when you talk about like defensive EPM, which is probably the best, he's had 2 positive seasons in a row. And you look at the guards above him, the only ones that had a better defensive EPM last year were Drew Holiday and Fred VanVleet. Everybody else is a negative. Everyone else is behind him. So like even Jalen Brunson, like he's 20th percentile in defensive EPM. Like I do feel like he does a good enough job defensively where I don't use that as a knock to kind of take away what he does as a playmaker, because I do think he's one of the better playmakers, and he is an efficient offensive player and a good shooter. I just don't see enough there to separate him in those tiers. And ultimately, like, we'll see, right? Like it's nothing we say is going to translate to the basketball court, but just for the sake of debate and conversation, that's where I was coming from, where I didn't really see enough there to say, okay, yeah, LaMelo's taller, but he doesn't play any defense. He doesn't give any effort on that end. So why is he necessarily already ahead of him?
So just to be clear, they're like the tiers are very playoff viability focused.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that in regular season play he can be an effective defender, that's to his credit. But again, I think the playoffs are so much. All right, we're just going to put that guy in every ball screen. Or if we've got a physical point guard ourselves, we're going to run our guy into the post. We're
Mm-hmm.
gonna just beat the crap out of him, and that's just there. And teams have tried to do that to say Steph. It's actually, to be fair, defensively, teams have at times been able to wear him down a little bit just by sheer physicality. But
I mean, that was
we're
so
familiar.
2016, right?
Yeah, we're familiar.
Like
we were there.
We're running every single play at Steph. Not just because, like, you can kind of get a size mismatch.
Yeah.
They were switching him onto LeBron. You can wear him down, and that's going to have an impact on his ability to affect the game offensively as well.
But I mean, I think just the delta in terms of the offensive players we're talking about, and the fact that Steph is substantially bigger than Garland. He's probably got 20 pounds on him at this point.
In terms of weight,
yeah. So
I'm also not arguing that Garland should be tier 1 here. I'm saying I didn't see enough to say, okay, he's not in the LaMelo, Beal, Brunson tier. He should be with, Derek White and Alex Caruso, right? Like I just felt.
Now those are two players I love, so.
I do understand that those are players you love, but I don't think those are players that if you put them on the Cavs of 2 years ago, they're leading them to 45 wins necessarily.
So that's a great point, by the way, is that this is one of the hard bits of a project like this is the differentiation between a guy who is sort of a floor raiser, if he's your second best player, brings you to competence, but is maybe and Garland's young enough that this is not a permanent sentence or something.
Yeah.
But at this point, a little bit of a ceiling limiter because of some of these drawbacks versus a guy who is sort of a plug and play elite role player. How do you those are always hard distinctions for me to make. And I think I've sort of if there's a player kind of type that I've consistently caught heat for being lower on the consensus.
Small guards.
It's not just small guards. It's the pretty good but not great offensive player who is best as sort of a primary secondary guy, but isn't quite good enough at that and doesn't bring enough other stuff.
So I don't think. Oh, go ahead.
So now we say, like, the good news for Garland is the Cavs are going to be good enough that he's going to have every opportunity to show that he has learned from his first playoffs and learned how to adjust, learned how to adapt, when the team has learned how to utilize him in such a way to maximize the strengths and not have the weaknesses be as glaring. So it's not a permanent thing that he's there. It's just as of right now, until he shows me that that he has found out how to mitigate those weaknesses, or he improves to the point offensively where if he's coming down and he's 30 usage, 60 true shooting in playoff series, I don't care what he does on defense, he's going to be higher.
Yeah, right. That's how Trey elevator, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to ask a couple questions and also challenge a few things. I think, in my opinion, I feel like there is a little bit of an overstatement of the concern about his personal on-ball defense and how damaging it is to the Cavaliers.
And I want to be clear, it's off-ball too, because teams.
Sure.
This is the part where the targeting is. You mentioned, the Cavs being able to get switches with Steph. A lot of that is, you want to put him as the screen defender in a pick and roll. So you try to get, you set a wide pin for him, and now he switches, either is guarding a big, or he is trailing the play and is the screen defender in a pick and roll. And that's not a spot where he can necessarily offer a lot of, just again from size. Like he can't take away passing lanes. He can't, contest shots super well without getting super tight. And then he gives a chance to let guys turn the corner. So it's those, like, even the off ball stuff that I think gets targeted more in the postseason than just like, well, he can't guard anybody.
Sure. So I think what I'd like to kind of challenge is I just don't see as of now, like where the data is kind of supporting that's being as damaging as kind of we're asserting that it is. Because, in the regular season, as Justin mentioned, so a lot of his catch-all metrics are quite good. The Cavs' regular season defense was quite good. And the Cavs' postseason defense was quite good. In fact, much, much better than their regular season defense by the numbers. Now, obviously, there are plenty of bones to pick with the New York Knicks offense.
Context.
Yes,
Obviously.
Yeah,
Sure.
I'm not like the relative playoff defense and offensive rating is like, I don't really like citing those because it's the reason why offensive and defensive rating are good metrics is sort of, it's like it balances out who you're playing against across the season. Whereas if you play one team 7 times, it's like, yeah, we were great on defense because they shot 23% from 3. We did that, right?
But it's also probably why you wouldn't want to over-index on
Sure.
playoff games.
I'm just saying.
Well, so okay, I'm sorry, Carter.
Carter, go.
Yeah, I'm just saying. Like, I think like we're kind of just deciding that it's going to kill him right now. Like, and I understand that there's a lot of data that support it's hard to defend with small point guards. Sure, but like if there's a team that's built to insulate that pretty well, it's this one. And then I think the other note I'll ask before I actually get I'll kind of push back before I get to my functional question is that I think that you are a little bit underrating Darius's malleability. I feel like a guy like Austin Reeves' stock is so darn high right now because of the fact that he kind of fits with any lineup right now. I mean, he plugs into Team USA and immediately is like, yep, he's helping because he's out here. And I think Darius, at least on the offensive end, qualifies on that front. You look at his impact on the Cavs offense since he, found his footing, and it is not in the Trae Young ballpark where if he puts up 36 and 14, the team wins, and if he doesn't, the team does not do well. I feel like Darius's ability to be a guy who can put up 20 and 8 and maybe be the best offensive player for the team on that given night, even if the volume isn't there, plays very much in his favor. And I do want to suggest, if I may push back a little bit more, that is a spot where I would go, like, hey, I feel like we're not giving malleability its due, because I think he can help just about any playoff team on that side of the ball, respective of regardless of context.
So 2 things here. One is that's an argument for elite role player, not star. And then sort of tier 3, like the bottom of tier, that's sort of the role player ceiling is sort of the top of tier 4, and it just has been. And so,
but isn't that also a big part of what makes Steph kind of so special and like the absolute perfect modern point guard?
Yeah. But like him, and I would say Kevin Durant is another example of a like a star level player. It's like, yeah, just put him. He'll be great. You can do whatever you want. That's one bit. The other bit is it's not just Garland that I'm indexing on. I think last postseason was rough for kind of the slight mediocre or worse kind of hybrid guards. The Heat did great with Tyler Hero out. Jordan Poole was a disaster. So there are multiple index points to say that there's a little bit of a sort of a player archetype that he's sort of is a baseline against which he's being judged from. And I'll freely admit that. And yeah, Austin Reeves is, the fact that Austin Reeves is bigger. Also the fact that, Austin Reeves is closing playoff games with the ball in his hands, with LeBron James on the court. I mean, there's a certain amount of oh, really, to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I'm a big Austin Reeves fan. Yeah. That was not a pejorative. I just I feel like the bonus points we're giving Austin Reeves, I think also belong, should factor in as a plus for Darius, not a minus. I did want to ask, though, to actually get to my question, which is, I do think Darius left a lot of meat on the bone this last season in terms of kind of his game. You look at six 3-point attempts per 36 minutes, despite, every metric saying this guy's an elite off the dribble 3-point shooter. that's my answer to like what propels him to the next level, becoming that guy who, when he gets a sliver of space is firing away from distance. What is your road to him jumping up, a tier?
That's certainly one option. Another way is just since they do have, ball handling, and if part of it is to get Evan Mobley some reps on the ball, which I think is kind of a necessity, if he becomes a movement shooter as well. And I think that if if he can shoot off the dribble, I think that there's decent indications that he should be able to shoot off movement off ball as well. And so being able to be someone who can create defensive movement with their off ball movement as well as their sort of on ball gravity, I think that would be certainly a way to. I don't think the synergy between Mitchell and Garland was bad in any way. I think there's more there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that would certainly be one of them. And I think if he gets up to, whether it's off the dribble or, coming off of pin downs or relocating or what have you, if he gets up to 8-10, like that's a step forward there. Yeah. That's a way that he can, that I don't say that matchup proofs him, but it raises his offensive profile to the point where, okay, yes, you're giving something away on this end, but you're taking more on that end, and you're doing so consistently.
One thing that I've said a lot about my frustration with Darius's 3-point volume, because this has always been our gripe. We've been griping about this since his rookie year, because he's just so committed to being a team player and making the right play that it's like, brother, you just got to shoot. You can't let, perfect be the enemy of good, especially in the postseason. One other benefit, I think, to him becoming that volume 3-point shooter, both off the dribble and off movement, though I think his movement shooting is quite good by the numbers. I think his volume across the board needs to go up. However, one thing I really think that also does is it makes it a lot freaking easier to play the two bigs. If you are panicking defenses out to 30 feet by your existence, there's a reason the Warriors have gotten away with Draymond Green and Kevon Looney, who are not only, just as bad of shooters as Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. They're way smaller, but they're able to get away with it just because of the fact that those guys inspire such terror that, just setting a flare screen out there has, pulls two bodies. And I think that's where Darius and, I think Donovan is already there from a volume perspective on that front. If he's open from three coming off a curl, he gonna be shooting. Not worried about that. But
not a lot of hesitation there.
Nope. No. But no. I do think that really is Darius's next step, because it kind of future-proof. It not only, it not only matchup proofs him, it kind of matchup proofs the two big lineup a little bit too.
Yeah. You sent me off on a tangent. If Evan Mobley develops Kevon Looney's defensive feel for the game, he's a defensive player of the year.
I think he's already a defensive player of the year, Seth. That's what I'll say.
Yeah. Okay.
He just needs a few more fouls a game, and he'll get it. No, I'm kidding. I need to throw some homerism in there for a sec. I do want, because we want to be respectful of your time here. You had Donovan Mitchell, tier 3A, with Jaylen Brown and Edwards and De'Aaron Fox. And you noted, I thought one of the interesting things there, you noted his tendency to play a little bit of playoff hero ball could impact the team's postseason ceiling, which is a concern we expressed prior to him coming to the Cavs, right? And I thought the series against the Knicks was a weird mix of him pressing and then also trying to defer and trying to find that balance. Just not a good series. And specifically when we talk about the defensive end, that was one of the spots where he really needed to improve. And I think even going back to Garland, the addition of Max Strus and Isaac Okoro not being there to guard primary ball handlers, that's going to be a spot where Garland's going to be put to the test, and we'll see how he holds up defensively, whether he is able to add some strength and do well in that matchup. But when it comes to kind of Mitchell and finding the right balance between what he's so good at individually and successful team offense, I think you already kind of hinted at it in terms of, getting Evan Mobley more involved as a playmaker. But I want to know if there's kind of modifications within the existing personnel that this team has to kind of redistribute some of those responsibilities, to better maximize their collective strengths and make it harder for defenses to take them away. Is it Mobley as kind of the playmaker and just watching like ridiculous amounts of film of Bam Adebayo?
I think there's some. I think just getting the two bigs more involved, whether it's, you're doing some high-low passing, whatever it is, to just build a little bit more versatility, so it doesn't, especially in playoff settings, it doesn't like break down into one high ball screen, clear out.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go.
A lot of that.
Yeah. In terms of internal improvement, you did bring up Mitchell. There were times this season where he showed a lot more defensively. One game I can think of in particular against the Celtics, I believe, where he made 4 or 5 really game impactful defensive plays on pretty good players, on Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, very good players. And it's if you can you just want to see that more consistently, and maybe there's a bit of redistributing some of the offensive load to the point where there's more energy left for that. So it's okay, your job isn't to do everything on offense. Your job is to do everything to help us win. And so that means playing the offense and guard the hell up.
Yeah, maybe there's just something to the Jalen Brunson matchup where that's just a bad alchemical reaction for him, because I really do think he had a nice defensive year on the whole. And then, when they played against the Knicks, pretty much the whole, through that back end of the year, they had that matchup near the end of the year. Then obviously the series is just taking weird angles, lunging at
Every
the wrong
time they played the Knicks,
times.
it was their worst. It was their worst team, regular season and playoffs.
I just feel like there's something about that matchup that just is not good for Donovan Mitchell's defensive brain, because
I think he's just not used to getting overpowered.
I might
maybe.
And he's
so physical.
He's probably not used to guys being able to, not just because again, he has done good defensive stuff against Jaylen Brown, who's not, not small.
No.
But the fact that someone who can get under him and move him out of the way, I don't think that's something he's got that much experience, because again, he's probably been the strongest guard on the floor
majority
of his whole life, and then Jalen Brunson is just is a power forward playing point guard at times, and just
and Brunson, rather than Brown, he can go right, left, and grift, right? So there's 3 options for him there.
you are such a scumbag. Yeah, I think it's an interesting conundrum though. It's and it's also that stop and start game almost kind of uses Mitchell's athleticism against him. Most of the time it wasn't just a straight blow-bys. It was Mitchell lunging in the wrong direction. So I wonder if there's just maybe in a different matchup, he looks a little bit better, but I do think that is a little bit of wishful thinking, and really he just he just needs to play better.
Yeah, Reggie Jackson destroyed him in the playoffs a couple of years ago. So.
Well,
yeah. There's highs and lows, and one of the takeaways we had from that series too was, Carter and I, our formative basketball years and all the time talking about this team, we're so used to our star being LeBron James, which is just known commodity in the playoffs all the time, when that's just not the case.
Rich people problems, man.
Even some of the best players, you look at Damian Lillard, he hasn't really had an efficient series outside the first round, right? And he's someone that I would consider a playoff performer. You have guys like Jason Tatum, Kevin Durant, up and down the lineup. It's just so rare to have someone with the consistency of a LeBron James with that high of a playoff floor. But before we get
he's one of the 2 or 3 best players of all time.
Almost.
It's one of those funny things, when someday Garland will get up there with his lockdown defense, of course.
Would you guys be offended if I said there's a top 3 with LeBron, MJ, and Kareem? Would you be offended by that?
No, my greatest of all time take has been, if your top 3 is Jordan, LeBron, and Kareem in some order, I will respect that. I think that is the 3-pronged conversation. And who you prefer comes to what you value.
It's Coke or Pepsi.
Yeah, basketball is so subjective, and that's why we like having people with other perspectives on here. And I love, I think the internet has ruined people's brains, where they're if you disagree on sports, you dislike a person. like 99% of my real world sports conversations are like disagreements going back and forth, talking about different things we value differently. Like, it's fun. This is what
funny
it's
enough,
here for.
I agree with Justin most of the time, and I really dislike him.
Yeah, well, that's because I'm always right. Like, you're
even when we agree, it's horrible.
But Seth, before we get you out of here, I do want to get your take on kind of how you would define a successful season for the Cavs next year. What is there something they could show? Obviously, it's going to be playoff related, or I shouldn't say obviously, but I'm going to guess it's playoff related. But is there something they could show that in your eyes would say, yes, they are on the right path? This is a core that can contend in the future. I believe in this now because I've seen this.
I mean, so in terms of this is a core that they got to win around this year. That's not.
Yes. So
that means they probably have to play well enough in the regular season so that they're not playing, I don't know, Boston in the first round.
Yeah.
Or whoever else ends up at the top of the East that way. What Milwaukee, Philly, Boston, Miami, Miami, take whoever ends up in that. Like Boston at this point is probably the only team that we can probably be. Yeah, they're going to be really good.
It's Boston and Milwaukee for me. I think I'm
there's
confident
enough.
in Milwaukee.
There's enough questions about the sort of the age of Milwaukee's core that, to me, that.
Look, I want to project vulnerability on all these teams, but Milwaukee won a lot of games last year with Chris Middleton like not playing. So even if he's 80% of who he is at his best, I think 82 games or like 70 games of that is an improvement.
Yeah, no, sure. We can go round and round on that, but also, I mean, the Bucks had under Mike Budenholzer, the Bucks did have sort of a regular season kind of wheat threshing kind of thing going on.
That's a good point.
So and kind of at times it worked and at times it didn't into the playoffs. So I think with a new coaching staff, do they still have that? Well, we're playing a bad team on Tuesday night, so we win. which is a lot of in the Budenholzer years, that was a lot of they didn't lose that many games they should have won in the regular season, which is a great, it's you're beating all the bad teams all the time. That puts you in a good position to have good playoff runs, but it's not the same thing as, beating Charlotte on a random night in October is not the same thing as,
beating Boston in May.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'll say I certainly will never turn my nose up at it. I've seen enough losing seasons. That I'm like, listen, this is my favorite hobby. I would much rather win way more than we lose.
So I took myself down a tangent, but so winning around is on one hand. The other hand is, I think, Carter, to your point, having a roster that is intact and makes theoretical enough sense, and then you get in the playoffs and it just doesn't work. And so you go in and you just like, all right, we gave this, we gave it a clean run. It's not going to happen. These guys are pretty good, so there are levers to pull to rejigger this thing, and now we have to do that. That's not success, but that's progress. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's data. It's usable data. Like that was my biggest frustration with the postseason, was that I didn't learn that much because everyone had a bad series. Isaac Okoro led the team in plus minus. It just didn't feel like I could action enough. And some people do feel like they had enough. Like some people decided Jared Allen's not going to work. But I'm like, there's so much weirdness, so much noise, so much Danny Green at the 4 on one leg that I'm like, I'm not comfortable getting there yet. They closed game 1 with Jetty Osman as the primary defender on Jalen Brunson. They were so short on options. So
I feel like Isaac Okoro missing the last month of the season and then getting hurt again in game 1, like that just. It didn't help. I don't think the Cavs responded well to the 10 days off between the regular season and the playoffs. Like there's just so many like levels of failure to this that it just, and that's not an excuse.
But now we have enough. I think they now have enough. for us to really know, and it's just going to be so whether they win a round or God hope of 2 rounds, that would be amazing.
My big take is that I don't think they can be outclassed again. I don't think they can be outclassed again. Like, I think they have to win a round, and I think they need to be competitive, because if you win a round, you're playing one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. You have to look competitive. If it's like a 4 or 5 game series against one of those teams and you're just very clearly not in the same weight class, I think that's very, very concerning. Like, we had a debate in the Discord of, would you rather lose in 5 in the Eastern Conference Finals and win the in-season tournament, or lose in 7 in the second round and win the in-season tournament? And I want the tournament win, and I want to lose in 7 to a very good team rather than getting outclassed. Because I think if they get outclassed, then you start to question about the viability of this core.
That's funny. Did
that tickle your fancy there?
It reminded me of a mistake I almost made in the tier. I think a mistake I almost made in the tiers last year, where I was going to push Jason Tatum down for having a mediocre finals, and I was like, wait a minute. So I would have felt better about him if Jimmy Butler's shot had gone in, and they hadn't got a chance to play against this better team. That doesn't make any sense. So I think
it's basically the LeBron thing, right? Like, he's penalized for making the finals with teams that aren't as good.
The dumbest thing ever, but like 8 straight finals is one of the most amazing runs like, the distribution of talent was not even between the conferences, but it was a pretty good level of talent across the league. Yeah. And to go to 8 straight finals is like ludicrous.
It's ridiculous, and I will always give some respect to the Roy Hibbert Pacers. That was a very fun team that I like to root for, and was wishing that they would beat the Heat. But Seth, thank you so much for coming on. We've taken up way too much of your time already. Really do appreciate you coming on. Anything before we let you go that you want to let people know about, that you don't want people to know about?
My book, The Mid-Range Series, still for sale. It's at online bookstores everywhere, and I am in the process of writing book number 2.
Oh, hell yeah.
Oh, congrats, man.
Do you want to tease? Is this the platform where you tease it, what it's going to be?
Nah, it's not nearly done enough yet for me to want to tease anything.
That's very fair.
Very fair.
It sounds like your book writing is very much about the same way that I use sentences. Basically, I start and we'll figure out what the point is by the time I get to the end of it. Big thanks to Seth for coming on. Make sure you guys are also subscribed to the Athletic NBA show. Love Nerder, she wrote. You guys do great work there. Buy the Mid-Range Theory, listen to them, read them, subscribe to the Athletic. It's almost that time where basketball is here, and I can't wait to talk about actual games. I hate these hypotheticals. Big thanks to everyone that tuned in live on YouTube. Make sure you like and subscribe, click notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast and you want to support us, leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of Chasedown's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of that review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. Until next time, go Cavs.